So let me.
I see it.
That's very good. So welcome everybody to this planning board meeting, which is really a subcommittee meeting. Why didn't I- Oh, because you. Let's see. I am Jane Remsen, the vice chair of the planning board, but chair of the housing subcommittee. And I have with me David Rosen, who is on the planning board, but not the subcommittee, Sean Henry, who is on the subcommittee, and Beverly Bookin, who is on the subcommittee, and our planning director, Greg Cadamatori, and I believe Eric Hinderly, our staff planner, is online in the attendees. So today we're continuing our discussion of the GZO cluster development versus open space residential development and the material that Greg found for us since our last meeting.
So I also, so in the drive, I found a couple of, well, let me go backwards and just say, it's kind of interesting because it does seem like there's a number of communities that are kind of reevaluating both types of ordinances. They kind of go under an umbrella of conservation subdivision. And really just, I think everybody's looking at the way they permit housing in different ways to try to see what's working well, what's not in the current climate. So a couple of resources that I added were, I think some good examples of showing really kind of the variation out there in terms of really what starts as the base, which is what are you going to measure, kind of this superior alternative up against. We know, from our own example ordinances that one requires you to show what you could do under conventional subdivision. And then there's a lot of different ways that things are calculated. So I don't know if you want to react to what you may have looked at first, or I kind of have an overview of a couple of things that might be helpful, kind of frame the discussion a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
So when I went to look at it a couple of hours ago, prepare for the meeting, and I opened the drive that was in the email
Yes.
today or yesterday, it showed all of those things, including these new conservation. I opened our cluster to
Yep.
reread it one more time.
Yep.
And when I went back in, I could not get those other files to come up. And I don't know why that happened. I kept going out and coming back in. And then I went to my Google Drives in general and started to scroll through all my Google documents to see if I could find it. So somehow I didn't prepare as well as I could have. So,
That's okay.
well, sorry about that, because I like.
There was a lot of information.
Yeah, I know. I saw it and I was prepared to skim read that up. So if
You know what? I printed out some stuff that Greg had. This is a sample ordinance from Chester County.
Okay.
And
Chester County, PA.
PA, yep. And then this is kind of a nice one pager, which shows.
So that's kind of the executive summary of.
Of this.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
And then, did you prepare this? Where did this come from?
I'm trying to remember if that was research that was assembled.
Yeah,
That's what I was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I asked for specific examples of calculation.
so I need this one back to take notes, but you can take a
Okay.
look at it right now.
All right,
So-
so if you have some big picture stuff.
Sure.
Since
Yeah,
a
I
lot
think
is
that would be
prepared,
helpful.
although I'm sure I would follow.
And I'll put this little PowerPoint into that same folder just to kind of keep us remembering where we
Mhm.
are. So this just subdivision alternatives, I think when you're thinking about any of these ordinances, it all starts with the purpose. And I kind of highlight this a little bit because I think even in the discussion we had last week,
Last week.
there may be some differences there. I think, the prime driver, obviously, of OSRD is open space preservation and permanent protection. Cluster preceded it in in chapter 40A and having communities be able to have an alternative subdivision. And they sometimes have different interests. Some of them are really just about compact development, more dense development. It was about economy and not having to extend, you know, if a community has a requirement of 150 feet of frontage and you end up building this very long road and low density, could you take that same density and compact it so that there was an advantage or from a developer's perspective and also from a maintenance perspective of, you know, I have to maintain 500 feet of water main rather than 1,500 feet, those types of things. And then in there, I think both of the ordinances, there's been an infusion of potential bonus related to affordable housing, but maybe not done particularly well. And I think we have to think about that in the context of our inclusionary ordinance as well. And as we just discussed, I mean, we still have to send forward the recommendation to the council on village development overlay. There was even some inconsistency between the approach to affordable housing in the village development versus our inclusionary. So I think we definitely need to be thinking about inclusionary being the umbrella, and then, you know, how that might relate to if it's something that you are looking to try to create some sort of bonus or increased density, what the trade-offs are and what you would hold a applicant to in order to do that.
Greg, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Under like density calculations, would site capacity also be included in that?
So yes, we can get to that as well. So that's one whole discussion, which I think, you know, again, we can line up the two ordinances, we can look at other models. You know, it's a series of objectives, you know, in the purpose, and you don't have to have all of them. You could focus it, you could add more, but I think there are some differences between the two, and that's probably the starting point, is really like, what are you trying to accomplish with the ordinance? Applicability, I think one of the things that I've found in a lot of these ordinances is they are really being applied in communities that have mostly 2 acres. So that's where there's a real potential to, rather than just lot out 2 acres, which is sprawl, and having that 150 feet of frontage, and sometimes I think the maximum you're allowed in Massachusetts is 200 feet. 2 acre and again, trying to condense that, and then maybe it's the interior, maybe it's a property that's adjacent to an existing open space to try to really preserve a large tract. So interesting that we have it go down to an R10.
Yeah.
And that may be some of the challenge of, do you really realize the intentions and purposes of the ordinance when you're starting with that kind of density to begin? So districts can be identified. It doesn't have to be all of them. We don't have R5 in the applicability, but there may be something to be said about some of the smaller lot districts and whether or not they're appropriate for it. Beyond that, the threshold size, for larger districts, we say 5 times the minimum requirement for a lot. And then as you get down into these smaller ones, no less than 3 acres. So that's, again, if you look through a number of ordinances out there, they range with a cut-in of sometimes often 10 or 20 acres in order to achieve the goals that they're looking to try to achieve. So there may be a parcel size, you know, cut in, and there also might be a district minimum dimensional standard that you know, play off each other, that may or may not result in what the purpose of the ordinance is. Density calculations, some of them are very simple. They go as complicated as a calculation and a proof or a yield. So that's, you know, I think this has a nice smattering of different examples. And again, I think that's a little bit would play on the discussion we had last week about, you know, if something is truly not developable for some reason. I mean, if you had a cliff, you had a wetland, if you had floodplain or other aspects, do they get included in the calculation of the basic allowable number? Some of them, again, are simple. They just say no wetlands, but everything else you can count. And then others will start to detract for a certain amount of things, like for instance, even infrastructure. You got to put a road in. It's going to consume 10 to 15% of the property. If you're taking that out of the calculation, you're adding to the density without kind of reality. Uses, we had some discussion about this with the Village Development Overlay District, whether this would be really kind of retained towards 1 and 2 family. That's what you can do in a conventional subdivision, so there's some parity there, and I think that makes a lot of sense. If somebody wants to pursue a multi-family application, there's a different process to do that. And then a little bit of the discussion of the permitting process. Pre-application, I think, is important. If you're going to do something, it'd be good for the board, you know, for everybody to see what direction it's heading, make sure it's something that the board feels like is appropriate for the ordinance. And then the real difference between what we have on the books is the special permit versus the subdivision. So the subdivision has to be very dialed in, because just like with a conventional subdivision, if somebody comes in and they meet all the requirements, there should not be discretion. That's the way it's set up. You set the standards, you set the table, they follow it, they get an approval. So that's a little bit of the difference with a special permit where, I mean, not that you're trying to, you know, make sure that you have hooks or, you know, loopholes or something to kind of bring something back into a little bit more of a discretionary environment. But that's what special permit does. As long as you're clear about what those things are, you want to try to be as specific as you can, but there may be instances where you just say, I don't see it.
When you say subdivision, are you talking about the density plan to establish?
No, so the OSRD
Yeah.
is an actual subdivision approval. It's under chapter 41 rather than under chapter 48. So that's you're sitting at the planning board as a approver of a subdivision versus planning board as a special permit granting authority under zone.
I see only one problem with that. So if you're in an R10 zone, minimum lot size 10,000.
Yep.
You do a cluster or whatever, you do the equivalent of a planned unit development or conservation, and you take the same number of units you would be able to build, but you agree, the property owner agrees to set 50% aside, which means that the units that you're entitled to on the whole site are now on 50% of the land. And by definition, when you subdivide it, they end up being 5,000 square foot lots.
Mhm.
Well, they don't meet the underlying lot size of 10,000, that's okay.
That as long as you set the rules, you can do that.
Okay, so the overall is 10,000 because that's the underlying zoning.
Yep.
And I'll say it again and we can talk about it. Every site, if you calculate the density using the size of the site and the underlying site size, gives you the number of units. That's the maximum developable. And that 10-acre parcel in say an R10, that 10-acre will generate the same number of units. The carrying capacity comes when you actually design the project and you come in with what is an early plan that shows how many units the land use that's not been set aside for conservation can handle. And it will be something between the maximum set and whatever physical and economic factors dictate it. And so make a distinction between maximum allowable, and on that specific site, the actual carrying capacity of the site. And I think if we understand those two concepts, I think that gets us someplace we need.
Mhm. So, and this is just because I don't think we've ever really talked about it,
No,
but
we haven't. This is great.
so this is the definition that was in chapter 40A, I think 4 years ago.
So when our cluster was created or,
No, well, so it was continuous probably since the 80s until 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, things like open space residential development, those were all nested under cluster.
Mhm.
And so I don't have to read that. It basically took anything that was an alternate type of development with the theory of trying to reduce the footprint for whatever purpose that was, whether it was for natural resource protection, whether it was to minimize the cost, flexibility, all those different things, they were under that one umbrella. And then in, I think, 2022, they broke it out into these new definitions. So cluster is actually no longer in 40A. Open space residential development refers to clustered. So there's no conflict. I mean, we have an ordinance that falls loosely into one of these categories. But it is kind of interesting that the state push is really to try to take this more open space residential development as the terminology used. But again, that's really kind of pointing to the focus of open space preservation, which is again, a little bit different than some of those other purposes that were in the older ordinance, which is, condensed economic, advantages and all those types of things.
remind me with the cluster, who gets to keep the open space? It's not necessarily public, right?
So that's one of the other
It's HOA
differences.
and
Yeah.
whatever.
The OSRD requires that an entity be identified, either it's deeded to the city,
Right.
the Conservation Commission, or a
Right.
nonprofit conservation entity. Whereas in the,
And that's consistent with the 48 current
Yes.
definition.
and the cluster, our current cluster says it can be a homeowners
Right.
association.
Yeah, and that's what, at the Village of West Gloucester, it's a homeowners
Yeah.
association that manages it. And it is a permanent, must have a is it under Massachusetts law, a permanent conservation easement or something? You put it in a non-developable.
It's
conservation
definitely,
tract
it's definitely
or
by plan and by deed, but
something.
I don't know if it's just a private deed restriction
Or
that
whether
it
it's an
cannot be
action,
developed
or
or
it's actually an
or if it was reviewable by the state. You'd
Yeah,
have to take a
okay.
look at
And
that.
But
also
that's
there's
something to consider.
Yeah.
passive and active recreation that can take place on the cluster open space, but I don't think, is there just passive recreation on that?
There's
OSRD.
different types of open space identified in OSRD.
Yeah,
But you'd have to,
Right.
you'd have to identify that use.
right, okay,
There's certain amount, well, actually, that's something else that can be discussed. There's certain amount of percentages of types of open space that can be into that
allocated,
50% calculation.
right, okay.
And then as part of the specific plan, the property owner developer can make an argument why this proportion really should be set in natural and not in a no touch where like a wetland, whereas this is available for
Yeah,
passive use,
playgrounds
active
or
use, that
right,
kind of
yeah.
thing. And that comes out in the specific.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's just an interesting context
It
of where
is,
we are
yeah.
right now, that
Yeah.
it's cluster is kind of a dated term at this point. And they've put it into this different umbrella of OSRD. And development versus design is kind of used hand in hand. And then just a whole separate natural resource protection zoning. There are some communities that have, rather than surface water reservoir, they have wells and they have different standards
right,
for septic systems and other things in a natural resource protection zone.
But that gets into carrying capacity versus maximum
Mhm.
abundance.
So I just took the two ordinances and kind of laid them side by side to start to just, I think, the big picture decisions are we gonna end up with one ordinance? How do you want to administer it? A special permit versus a subdivision? And then some of the kind of the more detailed of what are the advantages of the two? And how do you really arrive at that kind of base density. I think that's probably the biggest things. I think, sensitive site design, that's with what some of these sites look like, there's always gonna have to be, because there probably aren't too many lots out there that don't have some wetland near it, some other natural resource, or, it's a whole bunch of, we have a lot of open space, we have contiguous open space, and so anything next to it is, there's a potential impact to some resource.
And it can also be a hazardous area, like a flood zone.
Yep.
Or a steep slopey kind of thing becomes that, it's not necessarily, it's just not buildable.
So just with I think it's just a reality. We're 24 years away from Plan 2001, and that is, something that's referenced in the OSRD ordinance. That's what it kind of was born out of. So there's definitely some opportunity to modernize and look at our current
Strategic plan.
draft comp plan and see how that fits in. And maybe you do where you don't necessarily reference it. There's that difference of permanent preservation in B, in the open space residential development, versus, having that potentially through a homeowners association. Cluster mentions historical importance structures, which is kind of an interesting one.
It is.
That's not. So I guess that would go to, if there's
A big,
old farmhouse.
farmhouse,
on a big-
exactly.
On a big piece,
Yeah.
whether that's something that's important that has to be considered.
yep,
So again, I think we could probably list out dozens of different purposes from different ordinances and look at these two, and there's a lot of overlap, even within them, there's some overlap, but just kind of just deciding a little bit more clearly, what the intention is. I mentioned applicability. They both have the same districts. They mirror the same districts that you can propose an OSRD or a cluster in. The open space residential development starts off with the yield plan, so somebody's gonna make that decision, whether it makes sense for them to do it or not in a smaller lot district, whereas the cluster has that for our 10 and 20, that 3-acre minimum. And then 5 times for the rest of the districts.
which gets into an interesting question too, because if you have 2.5 acres, but it's next to Dogtown, it's still kind of worth it,
Potential.
Yeah.
I mean, again, 50% of that versus what you can actually do.
Yeah.
I'll
I
get
suppose,
you
yeah.
something else too, in terms of one of the things, so again, the requirements, and I can, the requirements are, there's a lot of calculation and set asides in the OSRD, whereas it's very simple in the cluster
Mhm.
development, which is a little bit of a, there's no allowance for road really. It's really just wetlands that are excluded, or other areas that are not developable by ordinance, and we don't really have too many others that are defined. So that's where, the OSRD starts to talk about slopes and buffer zones and other things that you might, including infrastructure, roadway, take away from in calculating your base. And so there's that example on the OSRD. You go through a robust calculation on the right-hand side, and then you still multiply that by 90%. So there's another factor that's taking away from the developable area before you apply the minimum lot standard.
And you take and that came out of that model ordinance, the 90%.
Well, this is what we have on the books for OSRD.
No, I know, but it's because it also was in the model.
Yes, so the state had a model back in 2000. I think, around that time, I think that's what a lot of that calculation. comes on. The amount of open space required ranges, just from examples all over the country, between probably 40 and 70%. And the minimum requirement in the cluster is 30. So there's definitely even though we've seen each of the cluster examples that have been filed have had greater than that, it's just a lower standard. Again, it's a different way of, it's much more flexible than the way that you have to go through and identify that 50% that you're going to preserve in an OSB. Not just procedural wise, there's a lot of steps in the OSRD. When I first got here, there was I think I mentioned this at the last meeting. There was a challenge of getting out of the site plan approval piece, which leads you to filing a definitive subdivision plan. So that's the board agreeing with the applicant. That is the minimum, basic allowed number of units, approaches on what the design should look like, and then going to the plan. The theory was, that this would facilitate a more streamlined approval process when it's in the definitive plan stage. It's just a lot of deadlines, a lot of time, and a lot of iteration that I think is maybe a little too heavy here. Not that there shouldn't be a mandatory first step with the board that's not the definitive plan, to have that feedback of, we think we should be focusing on this, open space area of the property, and after site visit, everybody takes a look at it and says, well, what was your thought about over here, that type of thing. Again, if you have a big enough site, you can see the whole site from the street, I think we might have an issue. Yeah. And maybe we've seen a couple like that. And then just one last thing that this can be refined a lot further, but I basically just took all the lots in the 10, 20, 30, 40, RC40 and R80, the ones that meet that minimum requirement for cluster, which is
3.
for the R10 and 20, and not less than 3 acres, and then for the rest of them, 5 times the minimum requirement. I took out city and conservation land, and that's what you end up in terms of the number of lots. I don't know exactly what that means. It doesn't mean
It actually means
Lots of
there's a lot of lots.
there's a lot of lots, but I think if you also then, if I start putting more constraints on those, like if I said, landlocked parcels, I can go
Yeah.
further with it. What's that? We do,
A lot of-
but
Landlocked parcels.
many of those are the city owned, and those are extracted from this, but the subset would be even smaller. I think some of the things that are a little bit telling are like RC40. There's very little opportunity there. And then when you start to look at the impact of only having to have 3 acres, there's a lot in R10 and R20, and I don't know if you could achieve everything that you're looking to achieve. in
Right.
those smaller
So
sites.
this says to me, number one, that this is worth doing and getting it right, because there's enough lots for which it would be applicable, even if they were landlocked or whatever. And then also, I'm surprised by the number of net lots in R20. I'm surprised.
Mm.
It's, double everywhere else. Why is that, do you think?
The zoning. Isn't it? It's just. the
Well, I'm
zoning
just
pattern.
trying to think of, I think there's just probably, because of what that lot size requirement was, like, for instance, before 99, starting with slightly larger parcels because they were zoned larger to begin with.
Mhm.
So it's the 10s that really, the R10 district, that kind of falls off a little bit because it's small.
Mhm.
I say that, I live on a 10,000 square foot lot, it's
Sure.
plenty of room to do a
It's
lot of
Pretty
things.
standard, it's a pretty standard. lot
But
size.
that there's just many more that are compliant at that minimum. It may be that also the R10 is along corridors that have been developed over a longer period of time. And so they've already
Yeah,
been
I know.
divided out to 10,000 square foot lots, so there's fewer 3
I'm
acre
just
parcels.
surprised that there's twice as many eligible lots in R20 as there are in R40. Just interesting.
Mhm.
And it also means don't discount R20. You know,
And I can also, if we want to go further into a particular district, we can look at the entire distribution.
Mhm.
You can see like, oh, well, if it really makes sense, to be at least 10 acres or whatever,
right,
what that would look like in terms of
Right.
of dropping. So
These aren't necessarily vacant parcels, right? They're including
No.
everything.
they're including everything.
but somebody could also put two parcels together easily, so
Yep.
we know. Remember that.
I think that's, oh,
That's what?
that's what I had for
Oh,
just overview stuff.
Okay.
Stop share.
Why don't you go to the first,
First slide.
that's really where the heft of this conversation, I think, should go, just about 5 or 6 times.
Yeah,
You want us to start the conversation?
yeah, I will start the conversation by saying, I think we can make at least one decision, which is modify either one of the two ordinances or start with a clean new ordinance. And I would vote for a clean new ordinance. Everyone agree with that? Okay,
Excellent.
yay, go subcommittee.
Okay.
With a new name that
Yes.
it's not
With a new-
outdated like the two
Yes.
are outdated.
Yes. And then I think we should have a longer discussion about what we're trying to achieve here. So I would open that up to the floor.
I will say the other thing that there could be an advantage to the special permit versus the subdivision is if you repeal the special permit, we've got a few out there that then kind of get into this odd situation where if they want to modify, they still would always come back to the board in some way, but you're operating under an old ordinance. And so there may need to be some allowance for what's out there a little bit. We don't have any.
So wait, talk us through what would happen. I know because we've been through the process of a special permit for a cluster. What would happen if we made it a site plan, subdivision site plan? Slash site plan?
Well, if you remove the
The special
cluster
permit.
ordinance,
Yeah,
technically, they're a non-conforming special permitted use. There's like no avenue. They would come back to the planning board for modifications,
yeah.
and you would basically go, what was the ordinance at the time? And you kind of look back through.
So
there.
what's the solution to that?
I mean, I think if you have the cluster provision there, it will. There'd have to be some carryover language, I think, for those. I mean, they tend to be a situation, I mean, everything's not forever, but, they're so ingrained with homeowners association and maintenance responsibilities and development footprint and condo association, that there's not a lot of room for modification in the future, but there are from time to time things that may come up that they may need to come back.
So you'd still have to keep it on books.
No, you don't have to keep it on the books, but I'm just saying if we stay in that realm, there's a way to
Of
kind of
special
create an
permit?
avenue for return to the board under that. If it was completely gone, it's like any use that gets zoned out, if somebody still has it, they're
Grandfather.
protected.
Yeah.
But when they go to modify, it's an awkward thing. They usually end up at the zoning board, say, hey, we have this thing that we're doing. So to avoid that, there's a way to do it.
But they could still, even if we kept it, maintained it as a special permit process. Any changes we make could still possibly put them in conflict with the new ordinance, right? Depending on,
Potentially. I mean, they would still always get a little bit of that allowance for what they were permitted under. But as they, if they try to do something new to modify, then they would have to be held to the new standard.
And there might be a definition of a minor change versus a major change.
Yep.
The minor change would be recognize that it's grandfathered and it's now non-conforming with the regulations, not necessarily the underlying specifics of the zoning code, but the regulation. But it's allowed through a streamline.
Mhm.
And if it's a major change, like adding units, for
Yep.
example, then it should have to go through the same process, maybe that the new one does or something like that. I mean, you could make a
Yep.
distinction.
Yep.
So if we design a new ordinance, keeping all these issues in mind, is that something you and your office can do? Or do we need a consultant? Do we need Judy Barrett? And-
I mean, I think we can probably work on some.
I could
Yeah.
help. I've written some.
Yeah, there's a lot out there and I think it's,
I don't
you know,
think it's a
some of-
reinvent them.
once you have the purpose, once you know where you want to do it,
Right,
you know, I think we can work.
okay. Well, let's discuss the purpose first. And could you throw up the slides for the cluster and the OSRD that had the purpose? Does that make sense to everybody? So. And there's also the Massachusetts. So one easy one is conserve open space, right? And sensitive areas, right? Like wetlands.
And I would say about reduce infrastructure cost.
And provide flexibility. Design flexibility, right? Which is really actually the same as, I mean, it goes along with reducing infrastructure, so it's more efficient infrastructure.
The two are missing. That is a artifact of their age. Is the fact that 25 years ago or whenever, the housing crisis wasn't the housing crisis. And
Right.
so we're looking at ways of encouraging housing development by reducing barriers and reducing costs and so on. And you can have two things at the same time.
Mhm.
Encouraging housing and preserving open space, right? So it does talk about minimizing a consent, let's see, it said by streets and utilities, encourage efficient creative use of land and harmony with nature. But it doesn't really say to facilitate housing development.
No, and this is in the model in the Chester County one, it says. Provide for a diversity of lot sizes, building density and housing choices. And to accommodate a variety of age and income groups and residential preferences, so that the municipality's population diversity may be maintained. Kind of cool one.
Yeah, so that's, but then you're starting to get to a larger site because it's very hard to have a variety of housing types and sizes on a 3-acre site.
Right, but I mean,
But no, that's the point. It can be
Yeah.
both housing and conservation, and they can be of equal value.
Well, I actually read this as providing a variety, a diversity of lot sizes, building densities and housing choices within the municipality, not necessarily
Ah,
within the
right.
development,
That it's making some contributions.
right?
So if that's the case, then the first set isn't a bad set to start with, but there should be some balancing of the housing issue and the conservation issue,
Right.
the efficiency issue. They're really all interrelated, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with, I mean, you can have two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And do we want to just say housing or have it also say, well, encourage housing, but also encourage affordable housing?
Well, but I think it gets to all types and
But we could make a specific purpose.
that's not a problem. And plus we have a inclusionary zoning requirement anyway. It's a given. That any number of units over 6, is it,
Yes.
has to have 15%.
Then
So
that's-
it's like, it's kind of built in. I mean, not that you shouldn't
Yeah,
say it, but the point is we have that in it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel on
But I think
it.
we should say, based on
yes,
this history, when we didn't put it in the overlay district for Halyard and Y. And very first presentation they made,
Mm,
there was no inclusionary housing include at Halyard. And
Really, that's interesting.
the initial response was, doesn't say it in the overlay, and there's a second response is, well, we factored that into the buyout into our price.
Mm.
When
We ended up having to pick up their review.
okay.
But I think it also makes sense in that, like you're saying, if it's what we've done with the past couple of projects that have made, hit the threshold of 6 units that have been either cluster or a subdivision. We then have to go and explain it in the decision. Whereas instead of having it up front and reference,
Right.
this is something that you're,
It's a requirement.
it should be addressed when somebody is filing the application, or how they're gonna deal with it. Not,
Know that you have to-
okay, well, we'll deal with that, and, having a condition that says, oh, and you have to comply with 511.
Yeah.
No.
Having it more part of the discussion.
Well, it should be in the requirements. Affordable housing, portion of affordable housing per section
Yeah.
clearly saying, this is what you have to do.
Yep.
And then over a certain number, you cannot put it in a housing fund. You have to provide it.
Right.
Is it 8?
none.
9?
9 is the ceiling, and then 10 and more, it's in the development.
Yeah, okay.
Do we want to have something in the purpose that also says to provide clarity and predictability with this process?
Um.
Can we go back to that when we decide what is
Yeah.
decision making? Because if it's discretionary, that if we can make it clear and objective so that it goes without a special permit, then you can put that in there. If it's gonna be discretionary where it has to be approved, and most cluster developments, plan unit developments, whatever you call them, usually have to be reviewed simply because there's so many variability of how you develop a site that doesn't have the clear, land use standards and the clear width and height and all the things that you can check. It's not clear and objective. It's very hard to make it approvable without some kind.
There's
Right.
one,
There, I mean, looking through particularly, I don't know whether it was the Chester County ones or one of the other things that you said. I mean, there were so many different ways of coming at the density, right? And I think if what we're trying to achieve here is to encourage people to do this on certain sites, a purpose should be to make it a really kind of clear process for them, right? Because otherwise they get discouraged. What was the?
yeah, I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just saying we should bake a clear process into the ordinance.
Absolutely.
Rather than saying up front, we're trying to make the process clear for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here's a good one from the Massachusetts model ordinance. To encourage a less sprawling and more efficient form of development that consumes less open lands and conforms to existing topography and natural features
Mhm.
better than a conventional subdivision.
That's what's in
That's
RSRD right now.
Oh, good.
You're-
Oh, I can't see it.
Again, although it says, again, talking about, our experience with the Village Development Overlay District, grid subdivision. We don't have it defined anywhere. Conventional subdivision is what we usually, say,
Yeah.
so
We say.
I mean,
terms are important.
I don't even know what a grid subdivision is.
It's a,
It's just a you know,
It's, see, look
laying it
look
out
at
by
the other
dimension.
side of that.
Just
paper.
laying it out by
Gotcha.
dimension.
On it,
Just
yeah.
as a,
You lot the
here's the
entire
alternative,
thing.
right, and you say,
Right.
this is the
So I guess
alternative,
what
but
I'm
we're not
trying to
really
say
interested in that. We're really interested,
is
it's not an option,
preserve-
this is just a.
Natural features and existing topography, like cliffs.
But I think to get to David's point, if you talk about removing unnecessary barriers to housing development. By, by clear stand, you see what I'm saying is.
I do, but
No.
what,
Yeah, just figure out what the standards are and then, right,
Yeah.
that's Jane's point.
I know we should probably throw in the master plan to further the goals. It's always nice to have it,
Master plan, you mean the comp?
the
Comprehensive.
comp plan.
Yeah.
And housing production plan.
Did we put something in about encouraging housing?
Yes. Well, like actually, to provide diversity of lot size, building density and housing choice in a municipality, and then also affordable units per the inclusionary ordinance. Would you like to say something stronger?
Well, I think it'd be good to more housing, more small A affordable housing, which is smaller units and more deed restricted affordable housing.
Okay, to provide diversity of lot size, building density and housing choice, particularly small unit. I'm hesitant, yeah. Whenever you make something too specific, it reduces flexibility, but I guess in the purpose section, it's.
I think there would still be flexibility. If we go back, what I was talking about last week, and again, this is not purpose, but later on, when we start
Yeah.
figuring out density, if we come up with a plan that allows density bonuses on that limited section of land, by default, those unit sizes are going to shrink a bit, right? You're going to add 6 units to your set amount of acreage. You have to fit them in someplace.
Right.
And the most likely things, they shrink up a little bit, which would make them more affordable to build and hopefully more affordable purchase without being necessarily deed restricted.
And at the same way, when you put more units in this area, by definition, you reduce the lot size per unit. Right? So if you have an R10 and you have a bonus of 20%, by definition, the average lot size goes down by 20%, right? So it would go down to 8,000 square feet. Maybe you don't even have a subdivision, but the point is that a density bonus allows more density in this restricted area that you've already the property owner has already committed him or herself to, because it's excluded. So smaller lot sizes, again, the underlying land, it's less expensive. If you have less underlying land, you have less underlying costs.
And I think it is a good purpose to encourage more compact development in terms of size of the units.
Mhm.
To your point, when we were talking about everything earlier, like houses building to the maximum dimensions allowable versus trying to restrict that in this process.
Okay, I can't think of any other purposes. We've got conserve open space in sensitive areas. Reduce infrastructure to make it more efficient and provide design flexibility, provide diversity of lot size, building density, and housing choice in municipality, particularly small units / affordable with small a. For affordable units, deed restricted affordable units per the inclusionary ordinance at various AMI levels. 5, preserve natural features and existing topography, and 6, to further the goals of the comp plan and the housing production plan. And then we can say the most recent housing production plan instead of tag, or the most
The
recent,
2025.
instead
Yeah.
of pin yourself to like what will eventually become an old housing production.
Pretty well covered them.
All right, look at this. We've got 2 decisions. Purpose. Okay. What do you think, Greg? Add?
I
Can we
I
see-
would think that we can just go through and just look, one more time at some of the other examples, and see if there's something else.
Yeah, can you show cluster again on the front side?
Those,
So this mentions recreational facilities,
There's not one.
visual
piece of it.
character of the neighborhood.
I guess the G.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Well, if,
I know, I think it's a good one. Why not?
These are all fine, but not one mention of housing per se. That's the,
and what does E really mean?
through the visual character of the
Yes.
neighborhood.
Actually, that's in one of the model ordinances, and I was considering saying, what is it, just the character, I guess. That's such a subjective and
Tough.
tough, controversial term.
And it becomes an argument for
And,
NIMBY.
yeah,
It really does.
so I don't
Yeah.
think we need to say it.
Because by definition, if you're doing a new concept, a concept that's specific to this property, it probably isn't gonna look like the development of surrounding. And the neighbors, this is a hook for neighbors to say, it's not consistent with and these are typical.
Well, that has been one of the points of contention with some of the cluster developments in the past, that this is a single family district and now you're putting this
Mhm.
Duplex.
or cluster of homes that aren't single family.
That's certainly true.
So, okay,
Certainly
so
true in
let's
context.
talk about,
before we leave
Yeah,
that last one,
sorry,
with 400 years of history, is
Oh.
there a site that
Oh.
isn't historically significant
Okay.
to somebody? I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's really
so-
gonna have to be qualified in terms
Yeah.
of, because you don't wanna be set up for a decision where you're
Yeah,
issuing a
yeah, yeah,
decision and somebody says, well, that
so,
was such and such settlement in,
oh yeah, which happened
1686.
over in Sea Glass Lane,
Mhm.
right? Wasn't it somebody's special field?
Yeah, it was the neighbor.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah.
Historic,
Yeah,
Historic house.
How about
Yeah.
just structures of historical importance, but not sites?
yeah, because
The
that's
site's
really,
very
that's
good.
really what we mean, actually, isn't it?
And Deacon Farm. My vague, didn't they have a farm building and that they renovated?
Well,
They
there was
had
a
a
farm,
farm.
there was a farm on the street, there was the house on the street which was sold separately,
Okay,
and then there's a barn that Greg McCarthy's son now owns, which is, it's currently on the market. Gonna rehab.
oh, I thought they were gonna renovate it and
They were
put,
gonna renovate it.
and
but
put the
they decided not
affordable
to do it.
units in.
They haven't done anything to it.
Okay, I was just curious, but
It's
isn't
on
that
the
an,
market. It's on the market.
but isn't that potentially an example? I don't know how old the farm is. I mean, originally Deacon Farm was a farm, right? Okay, I was just curious.
Okay, anything more to say?
Well, I mean, that's another reference in open space, agricultural land. Agricultural preservation. Again, totally different purpose. It's not. But that's just as you're bringing up farm, that type.
Where do we have it?
Yeah,
If it was Essex, it'd be
Yeah,
one thing, right?
Yeah,
you could say,
Cedar Rock Farm.
you could say
Cedar Rock,
Yeah.
yeah.
preserve structures of historical importance, as, determined by, the historical commission or something.
yeah, I think probably when you get into submission requirements, there should be some referral or
Right.
carry over to
Yeah.
any structures.
Just like a healthy environment, the rules require it go to the health commission. You don't have to say that.
Let's talk about this. Special permit versus. Subdivision. I don't know how to make that. I mean, I guess. It's, the special permit process is more flexible. And that's one of the things people like about cluster.
I mean,
Is it, is it hard? Is it harder to come up? Is it? Sure what I'm trying to ask. What's cheaper, more expensive and easier?
I mean, I think.
Less expensive.
I think we do a lot of cross-referencing to the subdivision standards, and that's gonna be important to make sure that that's done well.
Mhm.
You know, I think there's a fee structure associated with both of them. Right now, a cluster's cheaper than a subdivision.
What are we talking about? Like $100 cheaper or?
No, it's, the initial permit application is $350, which is what every special permit application is.
Mm,
And then there's a per unit. And then also a per unit if you file the preliminary. So you get a break if you file the preliminary. The subdivision is more based on road length. So there's a couple little differences there.
yeah.
I mean, I think it's just, again, you define it really well in a subdivision. You have less discretion.
In a subdivision, you have less discretion. Okay.
Now, when you say, if we were to make this like a subdivision, what about a cluster development? I'll call it plan unit only because we don't want to use cluster anymore and we don't want to use OSP, whatever. What if you've got, like at the village of Gloucester where they live in subdivision, it is a single lot,
Right.
common ownership. Can that work under subdivision?
It's not a subdivision.
My point exactly.
That's one of the advantages of the cluster.
Wait, say that
You
again.
don't actually have to lot it.
You don't have to.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's a big advantage.
so I have the title to my unit, but we own the 25 acres in
Right.
common, and our HOA administers both the actively developed portion in terms of maintenance and so on, and is also responsible because it's chosen to do so. The conservation, the 12 or 13 acres of conservation is HOA managed in our case, because
It's
we
a
have.
condominium.
Yeah, exactly. So now that it does, and a subdivision doesn't allow.
So the
Subdivision.
cluster lets you do one or you draw lot lines, or you can leave it in a couple of large parcels with exclusive use versus having to lot it out.
But can you do it under the subdivision?
Under subdivision, you can't do is you'd have like, there'd be nothing to point to dimensional standard.
Exactly.
So I just have looked up the subdivision regulations. I didn't realize that there was a whole separate
Section,
section.
Yes.
What a nightmare.
Yeah, but
What-
that stuff's
what-
usually pretty
right?
standard, isn't it? Pretty
Oh,
standard?
it's,
mean-
well, no, there's a whole
There's a
separate
whole-
section for OSRD in the subdivision.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Because in most
And it's-
codes, there is a specific.
So you think, you
10
think,
pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yes.
think you're done, but you're still not done.
So it's not so, that's how you get to clear and objective. There's so many requirements that you
Yeah,
can show you have to meet each one of them. So there's no discretion, and it's very hard for a typical plan unit developer to not have discretionary aspects that are as a result of the specific site condition, size, topography, and
Is
so
there
on.
anything that exists legally that exists between the special permit process and a subdivision that would allow the,
what do you mean?
why, I think, one of the problems, I think, with the term special permit from the general public is repeatedly people think it's somehow, special means it's outside
Right.
of what our zoning
Mhm.
allows.
That
even though
that it
it's
could be
specified.
potentially not allowed.
Right.
Yes,
Well,
And the problem is,
Technically, it
many,
could not be.
many other
right.
jurisdiction states, they call it a conditional.
yeah, conditional use.
So then
that's
it's like,
the-
it's a permit, but it's gonna have conditions. It's something that's allowed.
Since we're
to meet-
writing
Meet
something
requirements.
new, a conditional permit.
Well, we'd have to change our zone to, because essentially our special permits are conditional uses, and the definition of a conditional use is the use is allowed in the site, in the zone, because of its size or operating, its size, its operating characteristics, and it needs to have special review to ensure that it's consistent with the surrounding.
Within our ordinance, do we characterize our special permits that way? Is there a definition of special permit required?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's all
Section
throughout the
1.
whole thing. It says use table special permits for alteration, expansion of non-conforming uses, general procedures relating to appeals, variances, and special
Right.
permits.
Yeah.
Asking in definitions.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, just to Beverly's point, her explanation, do we explain it in our ordinance that a special permit is an allowed use?
That because of its specific size or conditions of operation or whatever, need to be reviewed to ensure
special
its
permit
compatibility with surrounding.
It's in section. Procedures.
Because that does come up
Appeals,
again and again
variances,
and again
exceptions.
okay.
with all sorts of
Sorry.
things, whether it's cluster development,
Oh, wait, no, I don't have it on the screen.
deal with the character development, West Gloucester, that it's special. Meaning he's somehow getting special treatment
Yeah. I,
with
it,
the permit, 20 Main Street is the same way.
It's not
But
but isn't it
capitalized, so it
typical
doesn't
of
seem like it.
Massachusetts law that special permit in Oregon and in many other states, it's called conditional uses. It's not called a special permit. And so my sense is
Yeah, we
the
have
special
procedure, but
permit
we don't
is
really.
a more of a Massachusetts definitional thing. But I mean,
Beverly, are most
There's nothing in
PUDs in your
definitions.
experience, are they condominium form of ownership?
one, they're condominium, and two, they're subject to conditional use review simply because the whole point of doing a PUD is to take into consideration the specific characteristics of the site. And you simply cannot have a list of clear and objective standards that fit. That's the whole point, is to show why you're developing this specific site in this unique kind of way. Because, and it's better than the alternatives. Well, that, that takes review, that takes neighborhood input.
Do you have to show the alternatives?
Depends on the rules. You don't, it's not like you have to show, I mean, there's so many different PUD and I've worked in so many jurisdictions. You can do a lotting plan on a standard to show why the difference. And why this is, and then you can point to why this is superior. You don't have to prove that you could do this. Do you know what I mean? So some require that you do a lotting so that people can just see the differences from standard subdivision. Others don't. The assumption is if it were better as a subdivision, it would come in as a subdivision and you don't have to prove it shouldn't be a subdivision because you can argue it has unique characteristics.
But it seems like, going back to the purposes we outlined, it seems like the development is, this type of development is de facto
Special
better.
permit.
Because it's doing all these things that
Right.
the purpose clause asks for. So, which the conventional subdivision couldn't do, right?
Right.
If we can grapple with the density, if we
Yeah.
can come to terms on the density,
Yeah.
right?
Right, but
Determine.
as I say, you can calculate the maximum for purposes of design of start point. But you still have to show that whatever area you develop has the carrying capacity for the units you propose.
Right.
And that often is less than the maximum. Which also gets into density bonuses. Sometimes the density, if you can't get to the maximum allowed, a 20% density bonus isn't worth anything, because if you can't get to the maximum, you can't get to 120%. That's why it's important that the affordable housing piece be a part of whatever number that ultimately.
Mhm.
As opposed to getting a density bonus for putting it.
So do we have to apply the special permit standards? Yes, we do,
Yes.
in a cluster.
Yep.
And those are there.
Yep.
No matter what.
It's. Go back to zoning,
Neighborhood
go back to
character,
special
social
permit.
structure.
Can you go back to special? Well, it's for the zoning, board to do.
No,
No, it
so
just-
it's,
Oh, I just glanced at it.
by use table special permits. It then breaks it down by who does what,
Oh, I gotcha.
city council, zoning.
Gotcha.
board.
Thank you.
How much of a
Yeah.
problem is it really?
to be a special permit?
I mean, I think there's just an education piece that you're mentioning, that whenever that gets mentioned, people think it's. There's a very big distinction between a variance and a special permit. People don't understand the difference between the two. Variance is you're asking for,
A big
for
exception.
an exception.
Right.
Right.
Whereas a special permit is, as long as you do these things.
Right.
You should be able to
Is,
receive it.
is that a term that's used in Massachusetts?
What's that?
Special permit?
Yes,
So we couldn't really change it. No, okay,
so everything in 40A is special permit
Okay,
granting authority,
okay.
special permits.
So that's-
Following
We
uses can be allowed by
better
special.
define maybe ordinance so that people understand
yes,
these are allowed uses that
yes,
subject to review.
yeah,
And at least generically in planning language, variance is a change of a numerical requirement, a height, a setback,
mhm,
a lot size. Is that true in
Yep.
Massachusetts?
Generally, yep.
So when you're asking for an exception, it's not an exception to use. You don't get variances for uses, you get variances for height. So that's an important distinction. And generally, on the scope of importance, a variance is at the bottom. Conditional use or special permit is higher. A zone change has a higher standard. It's pretty, variances are in the main are considered big.
And waivers are, you're just asking for whatever the requirement is.
again, to be
waived.
accepted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We, sometimes they're called adjustments, sometimes they're called waivers, but they deal with.
So typically waivers are what somebody applies for under a subdivision. Because you.
'Cause those are
The
rules and-
statute says this is how you do it. Planning boards, you can make rules and regulations. And you can also waive your own rules and regulations if you think it's in the public interest. There really shouldn't be the use of waiver in zoning, but it does weave its way in there at points, but. Typically, if it's something that's varying from the zoning ordinances.
It's a variance.
Is neighborhood character typical for special permit, or is that just us?
It can.
It's probably, there's probably most ordinances were written that way in 1950s, 60s. That was just one of the tenets.
I don't know.
But think about special
No.
permits are not just like a PUD. Conditional use in a residential zone is a school. It's a religious institution. It's a museum. It's a library. It's a fire.
Mhm.
Sometimes you'll exclude city things, but it could be a firehouse. And that's where the compatibility issue gets in because you're doing something that has a bigger scale, something that attracts more traffic, something that's on a bigger site. And, I mean, and that's where neighborhood compatibility is really an appropriate consideration, and it gives
Mhm.
neighbors a chance to weigh in about should it be a 2-story school or a 3-story,
Mhm,
because it's a
mhm.
scale issue.
Mhm.
When you're coming to plan unit developments, almost by definition, you actually are reducing neighborhood impact because you're not doing a standard subdivision where there's a house on everything. You actually have these large tracts of land. They're often on the perimeter. They often are buffers. If anything, in plan unit development does not have the visual impacts on its neighbors that a standard subdivision. Generally, and it's instead of here, and here, it's here. And generally, almost by definition, the buffers are kind of outside. And that's exactly how we are at the village of West Gloucester. The 13-acre conservation zone is like this. And the cluster is here. You can barely see the housing beyond the buffer. And so it actually has less impact than it would if it were a standard subdivision.
The one on off Magnolia Ave,
Yeah,
that was cluster. It's got.
Kennedy, the one on Kennedy Avenue.
That was-
Kennedy's
It's on
Yeah.
Kennedy
So
Avenue.
again, you'll never see that.
Kennedy Road, that was a subdivision.
Yeah, that's, oh, it
Are you,
is.
you're talking about
The
the
village at
most recent
Magnolia.
one?
Isn't
Yeah.
it,
What do we call that one?
isn't it Village at Magnolia Shores or something?
Well, that's a different one.
That's on Kennedy.
Yes, that's
on
Kennedy Road.
That was also built.
That was a
by-
subdivision, but,
Oh,
yeah, what was it called?
Can't remember.
Overlook? Magnolia Overlook?
Yeah,
Is
but
it
it
the one
had
that's like 8 units?
13.
like Yeah,
13
and
duplexes.
lots of
tons of
open
wood.
space.
Yeah, yeah.
Lots of, that was a
In a
cluster.
pond.
That's cluster.
All right, so it seems like people are mostly in favor of special permit. Versus getting it to the subdivision.
It sounds like we have to.
Yeah.
Non-lotting.
Definitely, yeah. If you're the quote, one lot. Would be.
And what makes it better to unlot it is, let's say, I'm not sure we could do this, right, because it's not very, our zoning was not that flexible. Let's say you want to do a fourplex. Lotting pattern for floorplex, right?
What'd you say?
Well, you have a
Oh, for
triplex or a
fourplex. Yeah,
fourplex.
right.
Lotting patterns are kind of weird. I mean, does the triplex sit on its own lot? Or do you run lot lines through the walls and create these three, you know what I'm saying?
Mm.
When you start to get to triplexes and fourplexes, if in fact you can make the argument that your plan unit development will allow that, almost by definition, standard subdivision just is not a workable, at least in my opinion. It's much better to have it in common ownership with an HOA.
Well, I think there's also advantages to clearly defining what the impact of the project is going to be long term. Because, with a subdivision, and when you lot it out, it happens all the time, it's going to continue to happen, but, Conservation Commission sees a subdivision that's lotted, and they think that's it. And then over time, everybody looks at that backyard, and there's more and more, push, towards the resource area. So this kind of locks it in and says, you know what? You don't have to have a 30-foot setback in the rear of the structure. It can only, it could be 15, and that preserves that much more open space and memorialize that, versus being, forced to use the rigid dimensions
Of a lot.
of the zoning standards.
Lot minimum lot
Yep.
standards. Yeah, absolutely. And so once you take the subdivision away, it's no longer clear and objective. Because you don't have the lot size, the lot dimensions, then by definition become discretionary, and any discretionary permit really needs to have a reviewing body and an opportunity for the neighbors to.
How about, qualifying conditions to be eligible? Which include, I suppose, lot size, and zoning districts.
You can continue, is there a restroom on this floor? David?
Grace, well, you want to take a little
Yeah,
brief
sure.
recess since we just
Yes.
was?
Yes.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
to use.
We'll pause.
I think you go to the Dale Avenue stairs and go down, and then,
I could also
right,
go
isn't
up.
that where the ladies' room is?
I could also go
The ladies' room is upstairs.
Up in our,
No, there's one downstairs.
isn't there one just in the,
It's right attached to the.
I've never had the looks.
Yeah.
can I just go to the city council one that I know?
Yeah,
I know and love.
yeah,
Let me
yeah.
just go real quick, and I think David.
Okay, we'll pause for a minute.
Okay.
Stretch the legs.
units.
Depending on where you're at.
And we're
Yeah.
back.
Um,
We're back.
Now, if, oh, that's good.
Okay, I didn't
Thank
even know
you.
we were off.
Well, I just kind of briefed us for.
Yeah, because we were
It
not,
may or may not have worked. I
we
don't know.
may have no longer been a, what do you call
So we were just gonna discuss conditions under which somebody would qualify for a whatever we're gonna call this. And that includes lot size districts. One of the things I liked about the Chester County one was that it says demonstrate to the satisfaction of the municipality that adequate sewage treatment and disposal facilities can be provided consistent with their sewer standards. So we don't have that in either ordinance, I don't think,
it?
but
Yeah, but that doesn't, does the sewage broaden to include septic?
right, but wouldn't that be a good thing to, because Sean, you were saying that sometimes the site capacity is just all about how much septic can be
Right.
provided.
Yeah.
Is in Gloucester,
Yeah.
and particularly in Gloucester. So what does somebody have to do in in a subdivision, if you have lots, it doesn't, Well, do you still do-
No,
you
you
still
still
do-
have to do, you have to show if it doesn't,
do you
if it's
do,
not sewered, you have to show.
right, that
which-
everyone can have a septic or that there's.
Or there's a
common
community
septic. So is, and in these, cluster developments, it usually ends up being a common septic, right?
Cause that
So
makes sense.
Always,
Not always,
The one up in Magnolia had, I think, dwelling unit had its own pump
Magnolia
located in
should.
front of the house. And then pump, it was a grinder pump in front of the house and then pumped it to the main
the septic.
septic system.
there was one proposed cluster that was on sewer. That was in
Right.
Scone Woods.
So we could say either it's on sewer or she'll demonstrate the capacity of,
And I'll look for specific language on that. I mean, we have the cluster development ordinance right now says at the time of filing, it's filed with the Board of Health. In accordance with the requirements of section 3.3 of the subdivision regulations, so there's a lot of bouncing around, but at
Yeah.
least it tells you where to go. That they review and comment within 45 days, so they should be the ones commenting on it.
but I think what we're saying is more than just review and comment. We're saying demonstrate the capacity.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is you have a section that talks about in the specific plan. You must demonstrate that the area being developed for the number of units being proposed is adequate to adequately support that density under our rules with regard to sewer, water, fire access, roadway access, parking, traffic.
I know, it's just that perhaps the sewer part ought to be upfront even to qualify in the first place, because that's where most of these developments have been, that's what has been the limiting factor. Right, and that will, because rather than making somebody do a yield plan and saying you can get 50 units, but oh, just kidding, we can only get septic for 10. Wouldn't it be better to say, like Sean was saying the other day, like figure out the capacity of your septic and then,
Well, I think from a developer, you're a developer, so maybe you could address this one.
no,
Oh, no, but you have real estate experience.
It looked like one.
You look like it. Okay, I'm only a planner, but it seems to me that if I had a client that had a piece of property that meets the 3-acre standard in the zoning, and we can
Yeah.
talk about that. The first thing I'm going to do, if I want to do a PUD, is do a simple, have an engineer do a simple kind of site plan and decide the yield. You know, whether it's even worth pursuing. It versus, a standard subdivision versus a plan unit development. I'm going to do a feasibility study, financial and practical. And I won't even come in for a plan unit development if I can't get a certain.
okay,
I don't think you have to require me to, yeah, and I'm going to do a sewer, either a sewer, if I have a sewer, it's a non-issue. If I have to, you have to have enough room, not only to accommodate your sites, but you have to accommodate two solid waste fields, you know, I mean, you know,
Yeah, but where's the upper limitation if you're sewer? Where's
the upper
on-
limitation
on-
is
Is-
established
is
by the
whatever
underlying
the-
zoning,
the
by the underlying
calculation.
zoning,
Oh, well, that's
Your
true.
calculation.
your calculation of,
Which is what we
density.
haven't- We haven't,
We haven't talked
we
about that.
haven't talked about it.
Yeah,
Right.
well, we need.
So
to
just,
talk-
just to get back to the septic piece, so that reference to 3.3 in the subdivision regulation says, at the time of filing a definitive plan, the applicant should also file with the Board of Health 2 copies of the definitive plan, and in unsuited areas shall submit topographic plan with 2 contours, apply with Board of Health requirements, including percolation tests and excavations. So they have to, that's what they're evaluating, that's what they base all of their preliminary decisions on for septic systems is. You perk it, you have a certain amount of soil, there's a certain amount of area, they make an estimate of what they feel is probably, homogeneous in terms of that area is where the field's gonna go, they make a calculation. So if they didn't have anything, if it was literally all ledge, that's what they would be saying. The Board of Health would be saying, there's no demonstration that there's anything that can be put here. They have to, so it may be that we could look at that a little bit more specifically, maybe look at the Board of Health subdivision regulations. Again, there's always gonna be a little bit of crossover referencing the subdivision. To see, is there something above and beyond that should be, preliminary calculation or some other 25% design or whatever it is, to help ground the discussion.
Okay,
I think the septic is, showing septic capacity is a good way to do it. My concern would be if you have really great septic capacity, how many units, where's the
Where's the
limit?
cutoff?
Where's the cutoff?
That's
Um,
the.
Well, I think
maximum.
that's
Right.
where,
It's not gonna happen.
that's
that
where
often.
right now, at 30% preservation, maybe you don't ever come up, if you did have a site that was, really well drained and had good soils, that's the challenge. Yeah, so it is in the calculation. I think there have to be some allowances for some of the other site attributes so that you don't get somebody saying, well, I can do
200 units.
200 units here based on my capacity, but I only have 5 acres.
But that's the underlying zoning, and the example goes back to the Bray Street. 20-acre site, 70% really was not developable, and they were willing to put into conservation zone, left 30% of the site. It was eligible for 20 units, but they could only accommodate 12. By the time they took into consideration the characteristics of the area where the housing could go, and then looked at their septic and well, and it was 12. But the maximum was one per unit was at one R40, and a 20-acre site would generate 20 units. But that's not. And you can start, and they had to bring it, by the time we approved it, they brought in all their engineers and, all that stuff is. But you don't want to go there with a specific plan until you've got a reasonable chance of getting approved. Right? So.
I think David's concern discussed, it has to do with if we're get creative with our calculation for the larger lots, right? Which we were saying last time. You can do a 2-family house on in R80, right? So basically 1 per acre. So there's really no incentive, if that's what you're sticking with, to try to develop one of these projects in R40 or 80, because your density, if you base it on that underlying zoning, is too small to yield a reason for
There's no
for
reason
doing
to
it.
do it, yeah.
Whereas if you get creative with how you're gonna allow the density calculation, so that you are allowing more units on the site than would be normally allowed in the conventional
subdivision.
development. If you happen to have a site with really good soil, as David's saying, you don't want that to be the cap necessarily for what you're gonna allow to go on there. So you have to figure out some sort of,
Yeah,
I mean, that's what the underlying zoning.
I think
is.
we're all saying the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
but the underlying, I'm saying that underlying zoning in R40, R80 makes no sense to even go
To
down
make,
this
to
road.
make that.
No,
happen.
So
Yeah.
unless the site is really, really compromised. And you really cannot subdivide, you could not take Bray, even though it was eligible for 21 acre sites, 1 acre sites, R40. You could not have platted that because too much of the land was either really recognized conservation land or was so topographically and engineering and structurally not suitable that you couldn't have done a subdivision. And the neighbor said, show us that a standard subdivision isn't better. Well, it's just obvious it isn't better, but, and that was the argument that they
No,
took
well, no,
in
that's
there. But the point being is if that 80, if that R80 or R40 is
I got
communalized, then you have a lot of, you have a lot of incentive to do.
Is that USB?
Don't you think?
It's US.
Well, only if we
C.
come up with creative density calculation.
Well, let's wait till we get to the calculation part of our discussion. Let's continue to talk about eligibility. I think we beat a dead horse here with the, oh, I just threw on myself. Look at that.
Greg, mine's longer.
Okay.
It's an HP also.
How about minimum size? Can I make it?
Parcel size?
Yeah,
You mean,
Yeah.
so what zoning? How far down the
Yeah.
zoning?
I mean, well, there's districts and then minimum size, because you could
Oh, yeah, yeah,
combine
yeah.
lots to make the minimum size.
How big was Seamist? Was that what it was, Seamist? The one-
Sea-glass.
Sea-glass, how big was that?
6 units, it's gotta be.
The parcel size?
It ended up being A and R, right?
No, it's subdivision.
What subdivision?
6 units. No, it's
So-
8 units.
Right now,
It's 6.
cluster is minimum 3 acres, and I don't know if OSRD has,
It doesn't because it's gonna, you have to do the
Right.
yield plan and
right?
there's probably a,
I don't really have an opinion on that, actually.
I think you have to have enough acreage that you've got enough room to. Yeah, first you got enough room to, enough acreage that's worth saving in some kind of conservation zone. And enough left over to build out. And it seems that 3 isn't a bad number, but I wouldn't go any lower than 3. I don't know what sea glass was.
Well, it's true, it doesn't actually make that much difference anyway, because no one's gonna choose it unless it's a better option, so,
Then subdivide,
right?
but still. I just don't think that a planned unit development 2 acres just doesn't make sense.
And should it be capable of supporting a certain number of units?
That's what's in the Webster County,
Yeah,
at least 10 acres in area capable of supporting at least 5 dwelling units.
that was about 7.5 acres.
For 6 units.
Sea-glass.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and-
what is the, zone?
It was R10.
with the Massachusetts model ordinance, it gets at that a
So
little
they could
differently and says to be eligible for consideration, the
14
tract shall contain not less than X number of
14
lots.
1428. They could have
Not
done
less
20
than some number of lots.
Well,
But
I
we're,
mean,
but
just
we're
like-
already talking
yeah.
about unlotting, so. But I think they're getting at the units. In other words, we want it to create housing, so it needs to be better or provide support at least, how many units? At least 6, at least 5, at least 3? Otherwise, it's silly.
It seems like it should at least trigger the inclusionary.
Yes.
6.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's
So, yeah. So then you're still gonna be up against that minimum size too. What's the
Minimum size of what?
the minimum size of a
sad.
parcel?
3 acres.
3 acres, stick with 3 acres.
That's 2 units per acre. Actually, that's not what happens in R20 or R10.
Well, I want to make a case for R10 before, and the reason is if you really want to have affordable housing units, it's very hard to build affordable housing units in R20, R40, and R8. R10, there's,
Yeah, so maybe we don't need a minimum lot size. What's that for anyway? I mean,
you mean a minimum, not a
Parcel
lot size, a
size.
minimum.
Parcel size.
parcel size, because no one's gonna use it if the parcel's too small to do anything on it. Right?
I don't know, do you think you could live with?
I mean,
minimum size?
I think it just goes back to, do you think you can achieve these things? On a, you know, if somebody came in with a
Well,
30,000 square foot lot. And they were frontage limited and
right,
they,
right,
you
okay,
know, they were trying to
yeah,
preserve.
So if you
15,000.
receive-
Yeah, I just, there's.
Right, so
some
it
part
has
that
to
doesn't make
be-
sense.
true. So what's the smallest lot where you could support 6 units and have a reasonable amount of open space?
Maybe we should, when we start talking about the calculations, we should try to see.
Okay,
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
at some point, you're gonna do a calculation. I'm saying, you know, it's a perfectly rectangular lot, has no restrictions.
Yeah.
What can you do? And
right,
then start layering it, see if it makes sense.
okay. Okay. And then as far as districts go, I mean, I don't know what your argument is for R10, but I see the downside to listing all the districts from R10 up. Right? Was RC40 in?
Yes.
And what is RC40, distinction between RC40 and R40?
RC40
it's
is a
east-
little ribbon of Magnolia shoreline
Okay,
and then also eastern.
all right. So it's an R40 that's in a specific area.
It's called the residential coastal district.
Gotcha,
So
Thank you.
1 acre on the coast.
gotcha.
And then how about uses? Single family, multifamily? What are the uses?
I think we should go to triplexes since even the MBTA only requires triplexes by right in that specific area around the station, you know, the MBTA zoning. Why not make triplexes?
Well, yeah. But,
They can promote, maybe worth going up to 40. Again, the, going back to our purpose of starting the creation of multitude of housing types, allowing a portion of development to be 4 apartment units and 1 unit plus some duplexes and some singles.
And a fourplex on a per square foot is cheaper than a triplex or a duplex. Because of shared walls, shared, you know, you have economy of scale,
Right.
and so it's more compact, it's less expensive. And so you know, your per square foot cost goes down.
wait, so are you saying only?
No.
You're proposing, what are you proposing?
1, 2, 3, or 4.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That would be revolutionary in Gloucester. Four.
Um,
Four.
One to 4
Remember,
units
Jane,
per
3
structure.
years ago when you said, or 4 years ago when you said, do you think this is gonna be a big deal?
What's gonna be?
Yeah, to-
The amendments. So it could be single family detached, it's unlikely, single family semi-detached, I mean, this is the what should I call it? This place, Chester County, multifamily limited to a maximum of 4 dwelling units per structure.
And then the issue is, what do you do with ADUs? You allow them only in single
Great
family
question.
detached. You could allow them in single family detached. In addition,
That's a good one to think about.
But if everything is developed like where you own your building, but you don't own the property, you really don't have any property rights to add any. So
no, we don't.
Only unless the association agree.
I agree.
Right, yeah.
And it's not that it's not doable, because some people have lower levels that are, you can go from the
Right.
outside. I mean, I could see potentially some of the units amending themselves to ADU. But no, but see, generally, when you have an ADU provision, it's only for single family detached. Because essentially a duplex is a 2-unit building. Do you know what I mean? It's the equivalent. No, I understand that's the case, but But generally, most ADU codes, and I've
We'll circle back to that, do some research.
Yeah.
Okay.
think about it.
And then it's probably goes without saying, but this is just residential. This is not any
Mhm.
mixed use or commercial.
It's not a big mixed use. We don't have tracks that would lend themselves to a big mixed use, do we?
Well, like Gloucester Crossing, but
Yeah, but is there another Gloucester Crossing?
okay. So what's the next thing?
Would that prohibit home-based businesses? If it's residential use only, or is that up to the licensing board to decide if a business is?
Home occupation?
Yeah.
I think that's through the zoning board.
And that's reasonable, isn't it? Especially with as many people who.
Right, I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
I'm just asking if that precludes that.
Generally, a PUD doesn't. It's the same standards for any
Do
residential.
you have any standards like that? That you can't
Yes.
run a home occupation or business?
No, but essentially they vary, and I have to look at the various codes, because remember, I've not worked in Massachusetts, but for example, if you have a home business.
Oh, I was just thinking about your development.
Oh, no, no,
If you
I
have
don't,
restrictions.
no, I don't think so, and we have a number of people who work, but you know, people are primarily retired, so. But nobody runs a business that has customers coming in and parking in their parking
Yeah,
lot
like
to
a
get their
dentist or
haircut.
something, right?
Or a CPA, you know, a dentist, I think you probably would do in a commercial, but a CPA, a hairdresser, a dressmaker, whatever, having people come. Or you do a home craft, like you do clothing, or you do dolls and you have employees come. You know, that's a home occupation where you work alone at your computer. I don't think you even have to license them, especially in this day and age. But it's when you have people coming and they're parking and you have employees, you know, that's when you're doing a commercial activity out of a house.
Right.
And that should, and I don't know if our area regulates it, but the fact is everyone is retired by and large anyway, so it's.
So we have 20 minutes left, maybe 15. The next big topic is the density calculation. Do we want to start talking about it or table it till next time? I think the Chester County has kind of a nice table. We could talk about these various types of land and how much would be
Open
counted in.
space and density dwelling.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I have a feeling there's gonna be robust discussion on some of this. Just as Greg is putting it up, it says, for example, land under existing private streets, 100%, and that's to be deducted from the overall calculation. So in other words, you're not allowed to count land that in which the private street is. Yep.
That's not actually quite a, that's, I mean,
I mean, that's gonna be, because I heard you last time, Beverly, saying you thought all of wetlands should be
Yeah.
counted, and I'm shocked by that, because I
no,
think,
just it's called shifted, what do you call it? Transfer development.
I know, but
But why not?
because it's
They're gonna
a
say it
sensitive area, and because you end up with a parcel that's too dense.
You're giving credit for something that somebody can't actually.
Right, so we want
I
them,
could be persuaded, but
we want them to choose this over a subdivision, sure. Oh, no, that's not what I
Well,
meant.
and that's also just
I meant this.
baseline. Oh, which one?
That's under Chester County.
4.0,
Oh, okay.
4.0 example.
Actually, I can share. Come on.
It's in this,
I've
it's in
got
the
it
same
right here.
document?
No,
Oh, which document? Sorry.
just let me share. I'll do it.
The-
Okay, you can share.
Conservation subdivision design guide.
Oh, sorry.
but couldn't you, well, when we talk about wetland, couldn't you make the same argument about hazardous? I mean, you have to deduct all of the land that's not developable, and then you get credit for the land that's developable, and
Okay,
There's
so
no transfer.
there, so So this says the sum of the constrained land determined. Whatever, anyway, you deduct these things as part of, as a multiplier. So to me, this makes a lot of sense. You take away existing public streets or whatever, which is unlikely.
See, there you've got the steep slopes.
Take away the land under existing private streets. This we'll have to talk about wetlands. I would definitely not encourage transferring development rights from any floodplain. I don't know what flood fringe is. I've never even heard that term. And prohibitively steep slopes. I like that too. Is 25% a standard calculation for
You need a
steep
sequence.
slopes?
I mean, that is what's usually termed to be of some form of physical impediment,
Mhm.
but it's not that it can't be resolved. So it may be heavy. Depending upon what your multiplier is. It could be, I mean, we have a lot of 25% slopes.
And then rock outcroppings. I like that.
So how is it that you'd have land within rights of way or existing public streets on an undeveloped site?
Well, I
You
don't know.
could.
Could you have two contiguous parcels with a private street running through it? But what this says to me is, if you were gonna put in a street, you don't
I'll
count
deduct that.
the land
Okay.
under it.
All right, so you've drawn out a plan and you're not, anything that's under your street or your common driveway, is
Is
yours a street or a common driveway?
Common driveway, so it's private. We're not, I'd have to redo the I don't even know what our underlying zone is at. We have only 34 units on 25 acres, so I think we are an example of not building.
Aren't you in R40?
Probably so. Okay, so if it's 40 times 25 acres, we're only
Oh,
allowed.
you're split zoned.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay, that's right.
Is it R40 and R80?
It's 20 and
R
40.
20. Because we have 34 and 20. If you had 25 acres in R40, your maximum would only be 25, and we have 34. So you have 34 units on 12 acres and 13 acres are conservation zone. Okay, I understand where this is coming from is an interesting thing. Talking about the streets, remind me, Dinkum Lane, Dinkum Farm Road, is it public or private?
Right.
It's private right now.
See the one.
It's private right now, but it does connect to, so that it does connect from Washington, so it does connect to public streets. Okay. Generally, PUDs are self-contained and their roadways are private. It's essentially just a long driveway. And it's interesting. On a subdivision, you take out your roadway from the calculation.
So that's, I think, to Jane's point about this, I think what I've seen is a percentage of the total area being something that you're subtracting. Certain amount, if you're gonna subdivide this, 10% or 15% is gonna be infrastructure. So rather than laying it out and then taking it away in the calculation for base density without, if you're not requiring somebody to draw a plan,
Mhm.
you create an allowance for infrastructure.
And you take the allowance out and you divide the remainder by the underlying lot
underlying zoning
size.
district,
So if
right.
the underlying set size is 10,000, you don't, and the lot is 20 acres, you don't, or 10 acres, you don't get 44 units, you get 38, because you have to take out, well, I won't bore you with the numbers, but it means that if you deduct the private lane, private road or driveway, whatever you call it, you end up getting fewer lots than just running 40,000
Yes,
into the. No, that's a standard practice.
And I'm just confused about this because this is saying, number one, the land within rights of way or existing public streets. If it's a vacant site, you don't have that, right? So there would be no deduction.
You might have a public street track, right, for a future street extension?
I mean, I think that is a little bit of an odd case. I mean, I don't think we're gonna run into it. You know, where maybe this is, you know, if somebody owned a farm. And they own both sides of, there's a public street and they own multiple parcels and they were trying to put it all together. And that's where they're getting into some of that trade-off of, we're gonna preserve everything over here, but you're not gonna count this. So I think,
Let's just pretend that this is the street that, because in a normal density calculation, you would take away the street or right of way
yes,
or whatever. So let's just pretend that's what it is. I think the ones that are hard to talk about are wetlands, and maybe floodplain. Or, you know, what we have, FEMA flood zones.
By the way, the definition in what we've got says that the site, in order to be eligible for a cluster, has to be contiguous. All the property has to be
Yes.
contiguous, cannot be divided by a public street.
Oh.
Right, right, does it
Right,
say that?
right.
So the issue really, I'm not even sure one
I don't think it really applies.
applies. I think it goes
Okay.
to the private, two is the private street. And it's saying you have to take 100%, and, you know, in a standard, in a multifamily, we assume about 20% for streets and infrastructure. I mean, this says you take 100% of it out, but what I'm saying is in a standard site with no, you know, vacant site that you do for multifamily, we figure about 20% for, which means that 80% of the site is developed. Does that sound right?
Yep.
So what do people think about, coming back to wetlands later, what do people think about FEMA flood zones?
I think they should be, that I do.
Okay,
Well, just again, wetlands right now, you take it out. 100%.
where?
In the current cluster ordinance, that's.
Okay.
subtract.
Well,
That's designated.
Yes,
what is designated? versus-
just the delineated wetland.
It's on
Okay,
the map.
Yeah. Well, I'm in favor of that. Anybody else have anything to say on wetlands?
I'd agree.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, it wasn't as hard as I thought. Steep slopes. I don't know what the right thing is to do there, but I know it's important to take it out. But our expert.
Extensive rock cropping.
And then I like taking out extensive rock outcroppings. And so I don't know how do you measure 1,000 square feet of an extensive rock outcropping if it's kind of vertical?
Well, I mean, that could be like all that. I think that's what that's
Oh,
referring to versus steep slopes are probably gonna be exposed rock versus just like
Okay.
like a knoll, like a well
Okay.
back.
okay.
Okay, so the only point I want to make here about this is the whole point of a plan unit development in concept is the transfer of development. You develop, you encourage people to leave out areas that are undevelopable and designate them as no development tracks and transfer what would have been developed there in a standard subdivision, for example, to the portion of the site that's buildable, and that's called,
Right.
if you take out everything that is unbuildable from the beginning and leave this, okay, then that is a decision that has to be made, but it means, and then you calculate the maximum density based on the 50% or the 35% or whatever is left after you take all of this stuff out. What, I mean, you don't need a plan unit development. I mean, you just say, you can build, you would have been able, if the site were perfect, you would have been able to build 50 units, but after we take everything out, you can only build 22.
But then you can put some back with density bonus.
Not equal to what you're taking out. Depending on the site.
To do under a standard subdivision.
On a standard subdivision, I'm not sure how you would take a site with all of these. First of all, no site has all of this stuff, although the Brace site comes close, I have to say. Yeah, but our site did. There's plenty of building area in our 25 acres, even with half of it in conservation. But what happens to this concept of the transfer of development rights? So that you are building in a more compact way, the units would otherwise be allowed on the site, but you are doing it in a more compact, cost-effective way that both decreases the cost of construction and preserves open space.
So that's what I'm basically getting at when I talk about coming up with a more creative way to calculate density in those larger districts of R40 and R80, because you're disengaging from that underlying zoning, because that underlying zoning doesn't give you any reason to actually use something like this. So you come up with a different way to calculate an allowable density for a given parcel, excluding all of that. And it's unrelated to all the stuff you're taking out.
Okay, so it's 5 up. My head's gonna explode. I think everyone should read this,
Yeah.
this dense, yep, here you back, open risk, whatever that Greg put in the folder. It's called
Yeah,
density
I'll resend you,
calculations.
I'll resend.
Yeah, I don't know what, maybe I'll open again and see. why I
And it's a
lost
different,
it.
here, Bradley. It's a different way to calculate.
Well, and I think maybe what will be helpful is trying to find
This one.
a,
Yep.
some examples elsewhere where it's been
Okay,
with different types.
Yeah.
I think the issue is, and I think maybe there's a common thread in here of if it doesn't arrive at the density based on the base zoning, that it would make sense. That's where the incentive structure might help. Because then you're actually getting something for the trade-off.
Right.
And if it's the affordable housing piece and you can only do 4 units, but we'll let you do 10 if you do X, Y, or Z, that type of thing where it might make some sense in those larger districts, but it also might be that, we can try to play this out a little bit and see
So
what's half of nothing.
well.
If it really, if
Yeah.
there's too many constraints, as Beverly's pointing out, that
What did we end up?
your developable area becomes too small to be even to do anything.
So what if you took the site that they came in with the village? Over on.
the village district
the
overlay.
village,
Yeah.
that site, and we took it and looked at it and said, okay, you have the ability, I would imagine, that you want us to kind of basically do those deductions, right, and see what that comes up with. We can,
As an
Yeah.
exercise.
Yeah,
yeah.
I
it's an
just-
exercise.
I just want to point out one thing.
I mean, it's good, it's gonna be coming forward to you at some point soon, so, I mean, I think, we can, I could try to pick something that people are
It's
familiar
gonna
with.
come forward as a subdivision?
As a
or
subdivision.
As a subdivision.
If I could just
That's a
ask
good one.
you one question before you leave, and that is 0.90% of land area times 0.90 of the underlying lot line, required lot size. I've saw that I've seen that in the, what do you call it?
Well, it's a little bit different in the cluster. Minus wetlands, that land area. I think the problem is the numerator and the denominator are the same, so it has kind of really no
Yes.
effect.
Yeah.
But it was,
has no effect.
that 10% in the top was
Yeah.
for infrastructure. And then it was not giving, and then there was basically the same kind of not the full amount of the underlying district. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's just say, aside from the wetlands, if you're not gonna argue with the wetlands, but if you took a 10-acre site, R10, which is 4.4 units to the acre, and you do 0.90 of the land area times 0.90 of 10,000, you get exactly the same.
Right.
And so I look at this formula and say, you get, out of that, you get 43.56 units, is it identical?
Yep.
So this 90-90 seems the oddest thing, I've never seen it anywhere.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So your guys are talking about some other formula that really is uncoupled from the underlying minimum lot size.
Mhm.
That's what
It's whether or not you're taking into consideration attributes of the site and their development potential and discounting it if it's not.
and you're
develop.
discounting it, and so what you're doing is you have some transfer of development rights, but you significantly reduce them because you're reducing all the areas of the site that otherwise would.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be able to do that in a conventional subdivision anyway. So there really isn't any development right for the
It's not-
steep slope or the wetland.
I don't see it as a transfer of development rights. I see it more as incentivizing by giving additional development rights. So again, let's look at.
Well, then you're saying the bonus is really where it is, because it's not.
Right, but I think it has to be. There has to be some way to factor it in upfront. Otherwise,
Yeah,
the property owner is not necessarily gonna
right.
consider it.
He has to know, the property owner has to know what his maximum allowable is. And he or she has to figure out how much land he or she's got to work with. And then see if the carrying capacity will get you between here and the max. Whatever this is to this is. And the
Yeah.
issue is what is the maximum should be. And it isn't taking 10 acres times. Divided
yeah,
by
I don't-
10,000 square foot lots.
I don't know what it is yet.
That's
So
all right, I've been persuaded that.
next week is a holiday,
Mhm.
and June 26th, I did send an email to Michael Nyman and Joe Parisi, who are on the ZBA, inviting them to come to our June 26th or another meeting if that was more convenient for them, or just to meet with David and me informally, if that's what they prefer to do too, because David and I are not a quorum of anything. And we were gonna, it turns out OSRD is taking a little longer than we thought, but that's fine. So we were gonna take up watershed protection, but I think next time we should continue to talk about OSRD.
Mhm.
And we can put watershed protection on there if we think we have time.
Okay.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question, which is then we're going to go today, which goes back to this issue, the tree issue that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Last week. Is there a regulation that says if it's an approval on a part lot, we have to enforce it as a part of it. It's all that, right? And it can have a minimum of 2 units on that, right? Plus an ADU.
Right.
A maximum,
Okay.
a minimum of 2 units in an ADU, a maximum of 3.
It can have a maximum of 2 units plus. an
Exactly,
ADU,
not a
right?
minimum. That's, I
And I'm
just want
thinking, can we, given that we are establishing the number of units through zoning that can happen, can we say for every A and R lot that has been created, X number of trees have to be planted along the frontage?
Not through the A&R process.
But through zoning, can we do it?
You could have,
For any lot that is created, X number of trees have to be planted.
well,
along the frontage.
that would be through like a specific tree ordinance provision.
Can't be a development.
That'd be for associated with a building permit, there would be a standard.
A development.
But we're not limited because it's an A and R lot. we're not limited
No,
from doing that?
No, I mean, new development, I mean, that's the Linfield model. And it applies to new construction.
Right.
Well, one of the samples you have though, we talked about, that if you're dealing with 3 acres or more of property, whether it's you're subdividing or whatever you're doing, then that the tree restriction pops up. So you could probably do it that way, right? So that if you're subdividing or otherwise altering parcel 3 acres or more, then you're required to maintain and or plant.
I'm not concerned. I know that we have control over if it's a subdivision. I'm talking about specifically A and R lots, because A and R lots, that's the bulk of the development that we see, right? And we have no control over what's going on there.
Right.
So my question is, can we, through our ordinance, say, even if it's an A and R lot, you are still required to plant trees?
Think about it this way, if you make it a development standard, it's the same as height, setback, number of parking spaces. You could add trees to the development standard. You wouldn't, isn't that what you're getting here?
Yeah, so
The
it would be
development
through,
standard,
it would
not
be
a
through the building
condition of
permit
approval.
process. You have to show, you would basically have provisions for either maintenance of trees in setback. And then some mitigation process for. That's what Linfield does,
Well, that's.
which I said is very enforcement intensive.
Oh,
I mean, because you're gonna remove a tree over a certain size. It's. there's a
I'm less,
review process.
I'm less concerned about the removal of trees. I know that that's a big issue. than I am about lots being created. Where
I mean, then you can have a vegetated buffer standard.
they're street trees, right? Because every A and R lot is on an existing street.
Yeah.
Right?
But
Well,
more
you're
importantly, we,
just trees along, outside the right of way, but along the street.
yeah, a street tree is in the right of way.
Yeah.
The street tree's in the right of way. That's why this is property line. But I don't think we can condition it.
It wouldn't be conditioning the A and R, it would be just the development
It would be a
process going
development.
forward once it's created. So we're gonna go back to this on 26th, and that's a regular meeting night, so what time do you wanna do a shorter or?
Yeah, should we just adjourn and then?
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. Oh, I can't. I'm not-
Oh,
Well,
yes, you
no,
are,
you're on
you are,
it.
you're on the planning board.
Whole planning
All in
board.
favor?
Aye.
Aye,
So
so,
you can just hit exit on that.
Are these yours?
And then, let me see. Make sure.
so what was your question?
1 second.
Oh, yeah, we have a planning board meeting. So how does everybody feel about? This is a lot to do and then go to a planning board meeting and keep your brain. 3:30 to